if I told you that the car millions of Indians call their proudest national symbol was actually something Britain threw in the trash? A design so unwanted, so finished, that its own creators were ready to erase it from history. And yet somehow, thousands of miles away, it rose from the dead and became a legend that outlived empires, governments, and even the company that built it. Stay with me, because this story is wilder than you think, and by the end of this video, you will never look at that old black and yellow Kolkata taxi the same way again. Because right now, picture yourself standing on a busy street in Kolkata, the afternoon heat pressing down, and rolling past you is that unmistakable shape. The one silhouette every single Indian recognizes on sight. The car that grandfathers point at and say, "That was the pride of our country." But here's the twist that almost nobody talks about. That very car, the one India adopted as its own soul on wheels, its own definition of prestige and power, was originally a British design that Britain itself gave up on. A model so outdated in its home country that its own manufacturer was preparing to bury it forever. And if fate had gone even slightly differently, this car would have vanished into automotive history as nothing more than a forgotten British footnote, buried in old catalogues and dusty showroom photographs. But instead, it became the Hindustan Landmaster, and later the legendary Ambassador, the self-declared king of Indian roads. And the real story of how a rejected design became a national icon is far stranger and far more human than most people realize. So let's go back to where it all actually began. In Britain in 1948, when Morris Motors launched its Oxford series, a modest, practical, family-oriented car that did reasonably well on British roads for a few years. Comfortable, reliable, nothing flashy, exactly what post-war Britain needed. But the moment the redesigned Morris Oxford Series 2 rolled out in 1954, something shifted in British taste. People started chasing sleeker lines, modern curves, bigger engines, a completely different idea of what a good car should look like. And almost overnight, this once respected Oxford Series 2 became yesterday's car. Sales began sliding fast, and inside the factory walls, whispers started spreading that its production days were numbered. And this, right here, is the exact moment where the twist of the story kicks in. Because at the very second Britain was preparing to throw this design onto the scrap heap of history, thousands of miles away, in Uttarpara, West Bengal, an ambitious Indian industrialist named B.M. Birla was quietly building something far bigger than anyone in Britain could have imagined, through his company, Hindustan Motors. Just 5 years after independence, when India was desperately trying to carve out its own industrial identity from scratch, Birla had already taken his first bold step by turning the Morris 10 into the Hindustan 10 back in 1942, then rebranding the humble Morris Minor as the Baby Hindustan for the Indian middle class. And when the Morris Oxford Series 2 started losing favor in Britain during the mid-1950s, Hindustan Motors saw an opportunity that almost nobody else in the world was paying attention to. While British executives were busy planning its funeral, Birla's team quietly bought the complete tooling, the full design rights, and the entire manufacturing blueprint straight from Morris Motors, shipped it across the ocean, and gave this so-called British reject a brand new identity: the Hindustan Landmaster, which officially rolled off the production line between 1954 and 1957, with roughly 11,600 units built in that narrow window, available in gray, green, beige, black, deep maroon, and even a striking turquoise blue, powered by a 14,776cc side valve engine producing 41 horsepower. Modest numbers by today's standards. But back then, in a country still finding its footing after independence, this car felt like nothing short of royalty rolling down the street. Because it offered a spacious cabin built for extended families, for giving suspension perfectly suited to India's rough, broken, half-paved roads, and mechanical simplicity that local mechanics could understand and repair without ever needing imported parts or foreign expertise. And this is exactly why, while Britain was calling this design obsolete and embarrassing, India was quietly turning it into the ultimate status symbol. Government officials, doctors, lawyers, and successful businessmen all saw owning a landmaster as proof they had arrived. And there's a striking historical irony buried right here that most documentaries never mention. The very thing Europe considered a failure became India's definition of success. Simply because India's needs were completely different from Britain's fast-moving, fashion-obsessed car market, India didn't need sleek curves or trendy styling. India needed rugged engineering, straightforward mechanics, and a vehicle tough enough to survive brutal summers, monsoon floods, and roads that could shake a lesser car apart. And the very design that couldn't keep up with Britain's changing tastes turned out to be an almost perfect match for India's practical, no-nonsense demands. But the story doesn't end there, not even close, because in 1957, Hindustan Motors made an even bigger, bolder move. They acquired the tooling for the next model, the Morris Oxford Series 3, which was also being quietly phased out in Britain, and turned this new design into what the entire world now knows as the Ambassador, which eventually replaced the Landmaster on the production line entirely. And what followed became something close to automotive folklore. The Ambassador ruled Indian roads for decades, from ordinary city taxis to the Prime Minister's official convoy, from dusty government offices to glamorous Bollywood film sets, where its enormous, cavernous boot famously played a role in more than a few dramatic on-screen body disposal scenes that became part of pop culture legend. And people grew so deeply attached to this car that almost nobody remembered its true origins traced back to a design Britain had already given up for dead. And here's the part that should really make you stop and think. This isn't just the story of a car. It's a lesson in perspective that applies far beyond the automotive world, because something written off as outdated or useless in one place, under the right circumstances and with the right vision, can transform into an absolute legend somewhere else. And Hindustan Motors didn't just seize this opportunity once and walk away. They kept this legacy alive for decades, right up until the 1980s, when Maruti Suzuki entered the Indian market with small, efficient, modern hatchbacks and completely reshaped the competitive landscape overnight. Yet even then, the Ambassador held its ground stubbornly, refusing to disappear because its identity had grown far beyond being just a car. It had become part of an entire generation's memories, present at weddings as the bridal car draped in flowers, present at massive political rallies, present in the driveways of government buildings across the country, practically everywhere across everyday Indian life for over half a century. And it's genuinely fascinating that when we see an old Ambassador rolling down the road today, our instinct is to instantly associate it with pure Indian pride and heritage, while very few people actually know its real DNA originated thousands of miles away in the Cowley factory in England, where it began life as a small, unremarkable car simply called the Oxford, a name given by William Morris himself after the quiet university town where he grew up. And when Britain finally walked away from this design without a second thought, India embraced it so completely, so wholeheartedly, that the rest of the world simply forgot it had ever been someone else's discarded chapter. And that's the real irony hiding at the heart of this entire history. What was a failed, abandoned chapter for Britain became a golden, legendary era for India. And perhaps the most remarkable detail in this whole story is that Hindustan Motors never tried to hide this British connection.